Allahu Akbar.
Syed Hussani is the regional disaster responder for Islamic Relief. Our beloved brother, he is also an ICNA board member and a Reseda masjid board member as well. He is an aspiring chef and a burgeoning surfer. Our beloved brother graduated from UCR, University of California, Riverside. Brother, if you could start speaking, Jazakallah khair.
وإياكم. بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي ثم أما بعد. Jazakallah khair everyone for joining us on this bright and early Saturday morning. Alhamdulillah. I think a lot of us had a very long night of ibadah, so I think a lot of us could be sleeping right now, but alhamdulillah, thank you for joining us, inshallah, to do something, hopefully to gain the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Inshallah, I wanted to focus on this idea of rizq minillah, this idea that provision, that sustenance comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and what that means to us. I wanted to take a few lessons that we can understand about rizq from the Holy Quran, and then understand what that means to us theoretically and practically. And inshallah, develop a few lessons that we can use to implement in our own life. Inshallah. This idea of rizq is something inherent, and we understand it when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains to us in the 11th chapter of the Quran in verse number 6, Ba'da a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, bismillahir rahmanir rahim, wa ma min dabbatin fil ardi illa 'ala Allahi rizquha. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that there is no beast on the earth, there is no insect, no animal, no human, no jinn, except that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides for its sustenance, provides for its rizq. And interestingly, I think if you understand humans at a natural level, at a humanist level, rizq is something that we are incredibly concerned about as a people. We think about rizq a lot, right? We think about this idea about where's our rizq coming from? What are we going to do to increase our rizq? What are we going to do to increase our sustenance? SubhanAllah, I think interestingly enough, if you've seen a baby that was born, just a few seconds, maybe a minute after it was born, usually it's crying. And the one thing that we find that placates babies at this point is that when they're suckled by their mother, that when they're connected to this rizq that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created for that child, they stop crying. They lose their discomfort and find serenity that they were searching for. SubhanAllah, after this idea of rizq, we must understand one thing, that this idea of rizq is something that is tied into our aqidah. This is something that is tied into our foundational theology as people. And what this means to us is a connection between this idea of aqidah and of tawheed. That when we understand that we understand tawheed, the uluhiyya, wa rububiyyah, wa isma, wa sifat, the three types of tawheed, that all of them connect us to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a provider. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from uluhiyya, He is unified in being the creator. He is unified in being the provider, that He controls the rizq solely. Then through rububiyyah, we see that there's a direct connection in His, we see a direct connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being al-razaq, being al-kareem, being al-ghani, that He is the provider, that He is the generous, that He is the rich. From these provisions, that there's a unification in them. And then that we know that Allah alone is the ultimate source of the rizq, from the isma wa sifat. But interestingly, these ideas that I mentioned, it's nothing new. This is something that we've all kind of understood, that's something that we've all kind of talked about. But for us to realize that we understand things at a theoretical level, but inshallah we try to make them practical. What lessons can we take and implement them into our lives to understand them better? So that we have to understand that the rizq, the things that come to us, right? A lot of times we think about rizq as being food or being money or being provision, but a lot of things can be rizq. But we understand then that rizq is not about the bank that we have. It's not about the boss that we have. It's not about the CEO giving us a check. It's not about any of these things that connect us to our provision. But it's for us to understand that while these things may be avenues, while they may be vehicles for us to get our rizq, our true rizq comes from ar-razaq. It comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what does this mean, right? I think a few hours ago, a lot of us had iftar, right? Inshallah, maybe in a few hours, a lot of us will be having suhoor, right? And we think about it, I can give you my case. My mom cooked the food for me, right? My mom cooked the food, and a lot of us, our parents cook the food for us, right? Or we go to someone's house and we're guests in someone's house, right? And have you ever thought, like, think about this case I'm about to give to you. If you were sitting there and you had the meal and it was amazing, and I sat there and I said, Ammi, mashallah, this food is so good, right? And I said, thanks to the spoon that I was eating with, right? After all this work that my parents went through, that my mom went through to make the food, I'm thanking the fork that I ate with, right? This sounds ridiculous, but it's exactly what we're doing, that we're give thanks a lot of times to the vehicle that brought us the sustenance, but not to the ultimate source of that sustenance, right? It doesn't matter if our boss cut us our payroll check. It doesn't matter if our refund check for COVID-19 has Donald J. Trump written on it, right? This rizq that is coming to us comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the idea that we take, because if Allah did not grant us these things, no one else could grant them to us. As we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in Surah Al-Mulk, in the 67th chapter of the Quran, in verse number 21, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أمن هذا الذي يرزقكم إن أمسك رزقه بل لجوا في العتو ونفور. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that, or who is it that will provide for you if Allah withholds his provision? If Allah does not grant us this provision, there is no one else that will be able to give us the things that we seek, the things that we need in our life. And an interesting point that I think a lot of us kind of jump to is this idea that, well, if Allah gives all of this rizq, how is this fair? How is it fair that my high school teacher that works so hard to help children, he stays after school all the time, lives in a one-bedroom apartment, but the Kardashians, they own mansions all over the planet? How does that make any sense? We go back to this idea of our aqidah, this idea of our fundamental theology. And we understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-adil. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most just. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-alim. He is all-knowing. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is wise. Just because we don't understand the wisdom or the knowledge or the justice in the actions doesn't mean it's not there. And that's a point that we take away from this, and we kind of bring them into our own life. And a question for us to kind of finish on, or for us to kind of understand, is that that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will grant his rizq to whoever he wishes. And it has nothing to do with anyone else, right? I work in the nonprofit field, and I can tell you, I know a lot of people who worked very hard and got very high degrees, and they could be making a lot of money, but they chose to work to help people. And now they're doctors and they're attorneys, and they're making a fraction of what they could be making. And I'm sure their family is telling them, yo, you should be making more money. But they've sought something more, and now the money that's coming to them may be less. But there may be other people that we can think about in our masajid. I know an uncle in particular comes to my mind that came to the United States maybe 30 years ago, does not have any advanced degrees, does not have any special skills. SubhanAllah, just started working small menial jobs, working in a gas station here, working in a convenience store there, and now, alhamdulillah, he's a multi-millionaire, owning multiple businesses. And the interesting thing is, forget about advanced degrees, SubhanAllah, his English is not even very strong. That he has all of these employees, but his children have to communicate with them because his English is not strong enough to talk to his employees. But subhanAllah, Allah has granted him the rizq. So we look at this idea, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will provide for people just as how he will. And we take this idea, when you juxtapose this dichotomy, it brings us to a very important point, that rizq is provided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it is something that's set, it's done. That we don't have to really worry about it, that we don't have to really kill ourselves about it and focus on it to an incredible degree. We see this narrated to us in a hadith that we find in the books of Bukhari, hadith number 6594. In this hadith is narrated on the authority of Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu. The Prophet ﷺ said, to paraphrase the hadith, Prophet mentions that about 120 days after a child is conceived, about 120 days afterwards, while in the womb, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends an angel. And this angel writes 4 things about the child. One of those things is the rizq, is how much rizq the person will have and will consume. subhanallah, that this is something, the rizq that we have is set before we are even born. And what we take from this is there's a beautiful hadith. A lot of you know Imran Bawlat, one of my very good friends, and he says this hadith very often. And he says that whatever is meant for you will never miss you, and whatever will miss you will never touch you. SubhanAllah, a lot of us focus on what we have to do, on how we can gain the rizq that is coming for us. And what we think about this idea is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He got us. He's taking care of us. This idea of rizq is something that is coming, and it's something that is stated for us in our understanding. But now to take it a step further, yes, we understand that rizq comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but that's just one part of the equation. As we understand from an ayah in the smack middle of Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes us, the Muslims, as ummatul wasata, that we are a balanced ummah. And what is this balance? Is what wasiyah? How does this affect this idea of rizq? Because sometimes people will understand that, oh, rizq comes from Allah. Because it comes from Allah, that means, you know what? I don't have to do anything. I can just sit here and expect my rizq to come to me. I don't have to study for my exams. I just make dua, and inshallah, Allah will give me an A. But we understand what is our duty to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this idea of rizq. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that we are granted a qalb, that we're granted a heart, and we turn this heart toward Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But these bodies, these limbs that we have, let us send them and move them in search of work. Let us have them work and move to earn, to gain that rizq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts the sa'i from us, right? And an idea that we take, that sometimes people think that it's more spiritual, it's more Islamically beneficial if you don't focus on the dunya, don't get a job, don't go to school, let's just sit around and do what we want, we'll make dua and Allah will send food directly into our mouth. SubhanAllah, when we study the seerah, when we study the Quran, this is not the lessons that we learn. When we look at this idea, first we look at the story of Sayyidina Hajar alayha salam, Our Lady Hajar. When we look at this idea of what happened to her after Ibrahim alayhi salam left her in the valley of Mecca, after he left us in the land of Far'an, which eventually became Mecca. What happened here was she had her child and she ran out of water and food for her child. So a story that a lot of us know is that after this happened, what did she do? She went to the tops of Safa and the tops of Marwa and she ran back and forth. That she made sa'i. The word sa'i literally means to pursue something, to go after something. And then she was doing it to find some provision, something for her child. And eventually Jibreel alayhi salam came down and he poked the ground and then water started to rush and she went to it. She was a little worried. She said Zam Zam, and from this we get the story and the name of Zamzam. What lesson can we take from this? First, we understand that Lady Hajar alayhi salam, she is a person of ruhaniyat. She's a person of extreme spiritual insight. She's a person of strong iman and extreme tawakkul, extreme trust in Allah. How do we know this? That when Ibrahim alayhi salam left her and he would not respond, and she said, "What are you doing? Why are you leaving your child and your wife in the middle of the desert?" And he did not respond. Immediately she said, this must be a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If it's a command, then we're not worried. We will not worry about what's happened. Allah will take care of us. SubhanAllah, when that happened easily, if she had an incorrect understanding, she could have sat there in the hot sun making dua, making dhikr, and just expecting something to come. But ultimately, she made the sa'i, she made the seeking, she made the pursuit of the provision of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And by doing that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent Jibreel to poke the ground and to have the water of Zamzam come up to provide the provision. And if you continue the story of Lady Hajar alayhi salam, you see that much benefit comes from this, and basically her son ends up becoming a prince of the early tribes. SubhanAllah. This idea that we don't just sit around, but that we have to do our part, that we take the asbab, that we take the means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides us. A lot of stories in the Quran that we can take. The story of Sayyidina Maryam alayhi salam, of Lady Mary, when she was giving birth to Isa alayhi salam, that she had to shake a tree, that she was commanded to shake this tree for food to fall to her. And we know that she was laying under a palm tree, and then Jibreel said, move the tree, and then the food will fall to you. And the idea is, if you take 10 bodybuilders and have them move a palm tree, dates will not fall. How can we expect someone who is in the pains of childbirth cause dates to fall. And the thing is, her actions were not directly related. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was sending the provision, but she just had to take the means. And even though it does not make sense that the means will connect to the rizq, we don't have to worry about that. We take the steps and Allah will fulfill them. We open the door and Allah will cause us to walk through. And this is the benefit and our understanding of the rizq and how we benefit from it. And I think a beautiful story that relates directly to this is a story that we take from Umar radiallahu anh. One day, Umar radiallahu anh, he came into the masjid and he found a bunch of people just sitting. They were just kind of hanging out. And it wasn't time for salah, there wasn't prayer, there wasn't a halaqah going on, there wasn't really anything happening, and they were just kind of chilling in the masjid. So Umar radiallahu anh, he asked them, he goes, who are you? What are you doing? And they respond, نَحْنُ مُتَقَلُّلُونَ عَلَى اللَّهِ. That he says that we are the people that we rely on Allah for our rizq. We are sitting here waiting for the rizq to come down. And he responded back to them in a very Umar fashion, right? Something that I think roughly translates to, boy, you better get up out the masjid and go get a job. What's wrong with you? And subhanAllah, that's the point that we take away. That he tells them that, he says, لَيْسَ تَوَكُّلْ هَذَا تَوَكُّلْ. He says, but this is not tawakkul, this is tawakkul, right? That alif of negation, it's like saying this is un-tawakkul. This is not tawakkul. This is not trusting in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then what we see is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted us means, that he has explained to us this worldly system of how we have to go and earn and connect ourselves to the rizq, right? And this, once again, people who have an incomplete understanding, sometimes they say that, you know what, I don't need to worry about that. I'm not going to go and get a job. I'm just going to sit around and make zikr and make ibadah, right? SubhanAllah, we have some people, we have the arifins, people who are close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they're a different category. We talk about the general awam, 99.9% of the Muslims. This is not our lives. Our lives that we have to go get a job and we have to get a paycheck, and this is how we're going to connect ourselves to the rizq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the asbab, the means that Allah has granted us that we shall use to connect ourselves to the means. And then sometimes people will think and they'll say, but isn't that less religious? Isn't that less better for me? Should I just be making dhikr all day or praying all day or fasting all day? Should I not be going to get a job? Should I be staying away from the dunya because it has all the problems? And this is not our understanding of Islam. That we learn about a sa'i, that this seeking, something that we take from the sunnah of Lady Hajar alayhi salam, something that's become a maqasid, that has become a ritual inside our hajj, in our umrah, to make sa'i between Safa and Marwa. This idea of seeking is something incredibly important, that we are taught as sa'i rizqul ibadah, that we're taught that sa'i, the seeking, the pursuit of rizq, it is an ibadah. And take it to another step, the as-sa'i rizqul ibadah, وَمَا تَدُّونَ ذَلِكَ فَهُوَ شَهِيدٌ. That not only is rizq, that seeking rizq in ibadah, that we also learn that if someone was to die in the process, right? Someone who's going to work, someone who's going to their job, someone who's engaged in business, get halal means for their family, if they die in that process, they die a shaheed. They die a martyr in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Because why? Because they died fi sabilillah. Fi sabilillah. And an idea for us to take one step further, and hopefully some lessons for us to derive from ourselves, is this idea that sometimes people think that there's a contradiction, that we trust in Allah and that we have to seek our rizq. And we understand that what Islam tells us, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Sunnah tells us, is that there's no contradiction. We trust that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes, that from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes our rizq, comes our provision. And it is our obligation to strive and seek that means in ways that are pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Another example that makes it maybe a little easier for us to understand is that with that of medication, we understand theologically that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a shafi. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a sign, is the source of all cure and remedy. But does that mean that we don't go to doctors and don't take medicine? No, of course not. We go to doctors and we take medication. But what do we learn? That the shifa, the remedy that is coming through this means of medication is coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we take the means, but we understand the source that is coming through the means, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A point I think that a lot of us have to focus on in seeking this rizq is that firstly and foremostly as khalq, as creation, as insan, as humans, that seeking rizq, while important, is not our main attention, is not our main focus in the dunya. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells in the Quran, Inna khalaqna jinna wal insa illa ya'abudun. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that I have not created jinn nor man except that they worship me. So our primary focus is the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when we have a hierarchy of priorities, we have to understand you cannot break a higher priority for a lower priority. So if our number one priority is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to do things that are pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we cannot try to seek our means in ways that are displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? We hear people, oh, you know what, I'm gonna take this job, but it has to deal with interest. I'm gonna go open a liquor store. I'm gonna go sell drugs. I'm gonna lie. I'm gonna cheat just to make a few dollars. Right? But one thing that we have to understand in our seeking of the rizq, when we connect it back to the hadith that was mentioned earlier from Sahih Bukhari, the hadith number 6594, this idea that rizq was written for us, and that what is meant for us will not miss us, and that what was never meant for us will never touch us. So when we look at these people who cheated and lied and hurt people and dealt with interest to make all this money, we look at people like J.P. Morgan, we look at El Chapo, we look at Pablo Escobar, who made millions and millions of dollars. But for us to understand that this rizq was always written, that this provision was always written for them. So if Pablo Escobar was to work in a coffee shop in Medellin instead of becoming a drug dealer, he still would have gotten those millions. He still would have become as rich as he was as a drug lord. And what does that mean? The only difference is now he got that rizq that was coming to him, but now in a way that is displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he has to deal with the displeasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from his displeasure, increase us in his pleasure, subhanAllah. So these ideas that ultimately we take away in conclusion, just to kind of wrap up, is first and foremost, rizq. That rizq is something incredibly important in Islam. That it is something we talk about often. And theologically, we understand that it only comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah will grant us our rizq and it will come to us. Interestingly, a point, some of the scholars mention this, is that just because you have money doesn't mean that it's your rizq. How many people do we know that have millions and millions of dollars, and when they pass away, when they die, they leave that money to their children? But millions were not their rizq. Those millions became the rizq of their children, or the rizq of their warith, of their heirs. SubhanAllah, that we think we have a lot, but Warren Buffett sold the majority stake in Lehman Brothers. And I was reading this article and I thought about it. How many millions and millions of dollars did he make? But ultimately, how many houses can you live in? How many clothes can you wear? How many meals can you eat? What is the point of all these millions if you're trying to do things that are displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So once again, to kind of wrap up this idea that we have, that rizq comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ultimately it does, but we do so connecting ourselves to it through vehicles of our asbab, through the vehicles of our means. That means we try hard, that we go out, we work, we study, we try to be educated, and we try to gain the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we see no contradiction between these two ideas, that we have trust in Allah, and also that we do our obligation to strive, to do sa'i, to do pursuit of the rizq. And we do so in ways that are pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not ways that are displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because in the end, you're going to get the same amount regardless of what happens. So inshallah, I want to quickly end with a dua, and I want to make this dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may He count us among those that are worshipping Him on Laylatul Qadr. Ya Allah, Ya Rahman, Ya Rahim, we ask you, we beseech you from your glory and from your mercy, Ya Allah, allow us to understand that you are Ar-Razaq, that you are the ultimate source of our rizq. Ya Allah, we ask that you allow us to never forget that. Ya Allah, we want us to allow us to understand the promise that you have made us, Ibrahim, that in shakartum azidannakum, that if we are thankful, that you will increase us. Ya Allah, we show our thanks to you for our provision so we may gain your increase. Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah, Alhamdulillah. Ya Allah, allow us to be always for your sake and let us never do anything that goes against your will. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم إني أعوذ بك من الهم والحزن والعجز والكسل والجبن والبخل والدين وغلبة الرجال. اللهم آفني أبدائنا، اللهم آفني أسمائنا، اللهم آفني أبصارنا. أعوذ بكلمات الله التامات من شر ما خلق. اللهم اغفر لي والدي والمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات والأحياء والأموات. اللهم اغفر لي أبو هريرة والأميه. اللهم إنك عفو تحب العفو فاعف عنا. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. جزاك الله خير.